The knife struck the board with a dull thud. The young man laughed loudly and barked, "You don't even know how to hold a knife, old woman." The laughter spread through the kitchen, but the elderly woman didn't flinch. Her eyes rose slowly, as firm as steel. A heavy silence fell, broken only by the distant clinking of silverware from the dining hall. She held out her wrinkled hand and, with a serene gesture, reached for the blade. No one could imagine what they were about to witness. Before we dive into this story, leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 10, and tell us what city you're watching from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. The marble floors of the Ashwood estate gleamed under the harsh, fluorescent lights of the service kitchen, each surface reflecting the anxiety that hung thick in the air like steam from an overboiled pot. The sprawling mansion in the hills of Napa Valley had seen countless dinner parties, but tonight carried a weight that pressed against every soul within its walls. The sound of expensive china clinking against silverware echoed from the formal dining room, where California's most ruthless food critic waited with the patience of a predator. Marcus Ashwood III paced behind the kitchen's swinging doors, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the cold stone with mechanical precision. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly groomed, his navy suit pressed to sharp creases, but his hands trembled as he adjusted his gold cufflinks for the dozenth time. The Ashwood family had built their fortune on hospitality and fine dining, but one scathing review from Jonathan Pierce could crumble 3 generations of reputation in a single evening. "You, where is Chef Laurent?" Marcus barked at the scurrying kitchen staff, his voice cracking with barely contained panic. The head chef had called in sick that morning, leaving the dinner preparation to a team of sous chefs who looked more like frightened children than culinary professionals. 20-year-old Tyler Morrison, the youngest line cook, wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand, leaving a streak of flour across his brow. His pristine white coat was already stained with sauce splatters, and his movements jerked with nervous energy. "Mr. Ashwood, we're doing our best, but your best isn't good enough." Marcus's voice rose an octave, drawing uncomfortable glances from the other staff members. "Do you understand what's at stake here? Jonathan Pierce has destroyed restaurants with less reputation than ours. One bad meal, one overcooked piece of meat, one under-seasoned sauce, and we're finished." The kitchen fell into a tense silence, broken only by the aggressive bubbling of reducing sauces and the rhythmic chopping of vegetables. Sarah Chen, the sous chef who had reluctantly taken charge, bent over the main course with intense concentration. Her black hair pulled back so tightly it stretched the skin around her eyes. Beads of perspiration dotted her forehead as she frantically adjusted seasonings, second-guessing every decision. The weight of expectation seemed to press down on everyone's shoulders like a physical force. The Ashwood estate had been featured in Architectural Digest, Food and Wine, and countless society pages. The kitchen itself was a cathedral of culinary ambition, professional-grade Viking ranges, hand-hammered copper pots, and imported marble countertops that had cost more than most people's annual salaries. Yet for all its grandeur, the space felt suffocating, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. It was into this atmosphere of barely controlled chaos that she appeared. The service door opened with a soft creak, and Dorothy Weatherby stepped into the kitchen like a ghost from another era. At 73, she moved with the careful deliberation of someone whose bones had felt too many seasons change. Her gray hair escaped from a loose bun in wispy tendrils that framed a face mapped with wrinkles, each line telling stories of decades lived in quiet service. Her clothes, a faded brown cardigan over a simple floral dress, looked like they had been purchased from a thrift store sometime in the previous decade. She carried herself with a humility that made her nearly invisible. Her weathered hands clutched around the handle of a worn canvas bag. Her eyes, a watery blue behind wire-rimmed glasses, took in the frantic scene with calm observation. She had been the estate's night-cleaning woman for the past 6 months, arriving after the dinner parties ended to scrub away the evidence of excess. But tonight, the chaos had called to something deeper within her. "Excuse me," Dorothy said softly, her voice barely audible above the kitchen's symphony of stress. "I couldn't help but notice you might need some assistance." Tyler turned first, his eyes widening with disbelief that quickly melted into barely concealed mockery. "Are you serious right now?" He gestured toward the elaborate meal preparation with a sauce-covered spatula. "Lady, this isn't church bingo night. We're trying to prepare a 7-course tasting menu for the most important food critic in California." Sarah looked up from her saucepan, her expression shifting from confusion to something approaching disdain. I'm sorry. I don't know your name." "Dorothy. Dorothy Weatherby." "Mrs. Weatherby. I appreciate the thought, but we're professionals here. This meal could make or break this establishment. We can't afford to have—" She paused, searching for diplomatic words that never came. Marcus strode over, his face flushed with a combination of embarrassment and rising anger. "What is the cleaning woman doing in my kitchen during service?" His voice carried the sharp edge of a man whose carefully constructed world was crumbling around him. "This is completely inappropriate. Mrs. Whoever you are, please return to your duties. We have a crisis to handle." Dorothy's weathered fingers tightened slightly around her bag's handle, but her expression remained serene. "I understand your concern, Mr. Ashwood, but sometimes the most experienced hands are the ones that others don't see." Tyler let out a short, harsh laugh that echoed off the stainless steel surfaces. "Experience? In what?" "Mopping floors." He grabbed a chef's knife from the magnetic strip and slammed it down onto the cutting board with unnecessary force. "Look, Grandma, why don't you stick to what you know and leave the real cooking to people who actually went to culinary school?" The kitchen staff exchanged glances, some smirking, others shifting uncomfortably. The tension that had been focused on the impending critic's judgment now found a new target in the elderly woman who dared suggest she could contribute to their sophisticated culinary efforts. Dorothy stood quietly for a long moment, absorbing the mockery and dismissal like rain soaking into parched earth. Her eyes moved slowly across the chaos, the overworked young cooks, the mounting pile of dishes, the steam rising from pans that threatened to boil over from inattention. She could smell the fear in the air, as distinct as any spice, mixing with the aroma of expensive ingredients being handled by inexperienced hands. "I understand," she said finally, her voice still soft but carrying an undertone that made Sarah pause in her frantic stirring. "Fear makes us all do things we might regret later." With that, Dorothy turned toward the door, but something in Marcus's expression stopped her. Perhaps it was the way his confident facade cracked for just an instant, revealing the desperation beneath. Perhaps it was the sight of Tyler struggling with a technique that should have been second nature. Or perhaps it was simply the recognition that sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected sources. Marcus watched her pause at the threshold, his mind racing through impossible calculations. His reputation hung in the balance. His staff was clearly overwhelmed. And in less than 2 hours, Jonathan Pierce would be served a meal that could destroy everything the Ashwood family had built. Pride warred with desperation in his chest, and for once in his privileged life, desperation won. "Wait!" he called out, his voice cracking slightly. "Mrs. Weatherby." Dorothy turned back, her expression unchanged, waiting. Marcus looked around at his panicked staff, then back at the elderly woman who had nothing to lose and somehow everything to offer. "What? What kind of experience are you talking about?" Dorothy's weathered hands remained steady on her canvas bag as she turned to face the kitchen full of skeptical eyes. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across her lined face, but something in her posture had shifted. A subtle straightening of her shoulders that suggested depths the others hadn't noticed. Marcus stood frozen between desperation and dignity, his carefully cultivated worldview cracking under the pressure of impending failure. 52 years, Dorothy said simply, her voice carrying across the kitchen with quiet authority. I started as a prep cook in my father's restaurant when I was 16. Worked my way through every position you can imagine. Tyler rolled his eyes dramatically, tossing his dish rag onto the counter with theatrical disdain. Right. And I'm sure that little diner in whatever small town you're from really prepared you for this level of cuisine. He gestured toward the elaborate array of ingredients spread across the marble countertops. Black truffles from France, Wagyu beef from Japan, caviar from the Caspian Sea. But Dorothy's eyes had already found the real problem. She moved slowly toward the main cooking station where Sarah stood, guard over a pan of what should have been a delicate beurre blanc sauce. The young sous chef's technique was textbook perfect, her knife work precise, her temperature controlled by the book. But the sauce told a different story. It had the look of something created with knowledge, rather than understanding. Technically correct, but soulless. Your sauce is about to break, Dorothy observed quietly, nodding toward Sarah's pan. Sarah's head snapped up, defensive fire flashing in her eyes. Excuse me. I've been making beurre blanc for 3 years. The temperature is perfect, Dorothy interrupted gently. But you're stirring with fear instead of confidence. The butter can sense it. The kitchen fell silent except for the dangerous bubbling from Sarah's pan. Marcus stepped closer, his businessman's instinct for reading people warring with his preconceptions about the elderly cleaning woman. There was something in Dorothy's tone, a certainty that came from places deeper than training. Sarah stared at her sauce, then at Dorothy, her professional pride battling against the growing evidence that something was indeed wrong. The emulsion was beginning to separate at the edges, tiny beads of fat breaking free from the smooth integration she had worked so hard to achieve. How could you possibly know that by just looking? Dorothy moved closer, her movements now purposeful rather than apologetic. Because I've broken 1,000 sauces learning how to save them. May I? The question hung in the air like incense. Marcus felt the weight of time pressing against his chest. Jonathan Pierce's critical palate, the family's reputation, the jobs of everyone in this kitchen. Logic screamed at him to maintain control, to stick with known quantities, to trust in expensive training over mysterious intuition. But something else, some deeper wisdom born of genuine desperation, whispered that sometimes the most unlikely solutions were the truest ones. Let her try, Marcus heard himself say, the words escaping before his rational mind could stop them. Tyler dropped his knife with a clatter that echoed off the stainless steel surfaces. Are you insane? We're going to let the cleaning ladies sabotage the most important meal of the year. What's the alternative? Marcus's voice cracked with exhaustion. Look around, Tyler. Look at what we're producing. Does this look like success to you? Dorothy didn't wait for permission to be withdrawn. She moved to Sarah's station with the fluid grace of someone who had inhabited professional kitchens for more years than most of the staff had been alive. Her weathered hands took the wooden spoon from Sarah's grasp, and immediately everything changed. The stirring motion transformed. Where Sarah had been whisking with mechanical precision, Dorothy stirred with a rhythm that seemed to come from some deeper source, as if she were conducting an orchestra only she could hear. Her wrist moved with subtle flexibility, drawing the broken emulsion back into harmony with movements that looked simple but carried the weight of decades of muscle memory. The sauce responded like a living thing. The beating fats reintegrated, the texture smoothing into the silk-like consistency that Sarah had been fighting to achieve for the past 20 minutes. The transformation was so immediate, so seemingly effortless, that it defied explanation. Tyler moved closer despite himself, his mockery dissolving into confusion. What did you do differently? Dorothy handed the spoon back to Sarah, whose expression had shifted from antagonism to something approaching awe. You were stirring to control the sauce. I stirred to listen to it. Every sauce tells you what it needs if you know how to hear it. Marcus stared at the perfect beurre blanc, his mind struggling to reconcile what he had just witnessed with his assumptions about the elderly woman. Where exactly did you work before coming here? A shadow passed across Dorothy's features, so quickly that anyone not watching closely might have missed it. Different places. I was married to a chef for 37 years. We ran several restaurants together before. She trailed off, her eyes focusing on something beyond the kitchen walls. Before circumstances changed. Sarah tested the sauce, her trained palate immediately recognizing the difference. The flavor was the same, the technical elements unchanged, but the texture was transcendent. It coated the spoon like liquid velvet, with a richness that seemed to vibrate on the tongue. This is impossible. I used the exact same ingredients, the exact same technique. Technique is just the beginning, Dorothy said, already moving toward the main course station where a beautiful piece of Wagyu beef sat waiting for preparation. Cooking is a conversation between the cook and the food. Most people talk too much and don't listen enough. She paused beside the beef, her experienced eyes reading the meat like a manuscript. The marbling was exquisite, the color deep and rich, but she could see what the others had missed, the subtle signs that revealed how to unlock its full potential. Her fingers hovered over the surface without touching, sensing temperature and texture through proximity alone. This needs to come to room temperature before cooking, she said quietly. And the seasoning should be applied now, not at the last minute. The salt needs time to work into the fibers, Tyler wanted to argue, his culinary school training providing ready counter-arguments, but something stopped him. Perhaps it was the transformation he had just witnessed with the sauce, or perhaps it was the growing realization that their current approach was leading toward disaster. Instead of objecting, he found himself watching her movements with reluctant fascination. Dorothy opened her canvas bag for the first time, revealing not cleaning supplies, but a small collection of well-worn tools, a knife with a handle smoothed by decades of use, a few small containers of what appeared to be homemade spice blends, and a wooden spoon darkened by years of service. Each item had the patina of constant use, the unmistakable signs of tools that had become extensions of their owner's hands. Marcus felt something shift in his chest as he watched her arrange these simple implements beside the expensive equipment that filled his kitchen. There was a dignity in her movements that spoke to something he had lost somewhere along the path, from passionate young restaurateur to anxious businessman worried about critics and reputation. "Mrs. Weatherby," he said slowly, the formal address feeling suddenly inadequate. "Would you be willing to help us with the entire menu?" The kitchen held its breath. Tyler's objections died on his lips as he looked around at the chaos they had been struggling to control. Sarah found herself nodding before she even realized she was doing it, her professional instincts recognizing something authentic in the elderly woman's presence. Dorothy looked around the kitchen, her watery blue eyes taking in each face, reading the mixture of desperation, skepticism, and tentative hope. For a moment, the years seemed to fall away from her weathered features, revealing hints of the passionate young cook she had once been. "I'll help you," she said simply. "But we do this together. No more hierarchy, no more ego. Just people trying to create something beautiful." As if summoned by her words, the kitchen began to transform. The frantic energy that had defined the evening shifted into something more purposeful, more connected. Marcus found himself rolling up his sleeves for the first time in years, remembering what it felt like to be part of the creation rather than merely the anxious observer. The real work was about to begin. The transformation began with Dorothy's hands on a simple onion. Tyler watched with grudging fascination as she positioned the bulb on the cutting board, her weathered knife held with the casual confidence of someone who had performed this action thousands of times. Her first cut was deliberate, creating a stable base. Then her blade began to move in a rhythm that seemed to emerge from some deeper source than mere technique. The sound was different. Where Tyler's chopping carried the aggressive staccato of someone trying to prove their speed and skill, Dorothy's knife work created an almost musical rhythm against the wooden board. Each cut was purposeful, precise, but unhurried. The onion fell away in perfect dice, uniform without being mechanical, each piece catching the light like small gems. "How do you make it look so effortless?" Sarah asked, abandoning her own prep work to watch Dorothy's demonstration. "Because I stopped trying to impress the onion a long time ago," Dorothy replied, with a gentle smile. "When you're fighting with your ingredients, they fight back. When you respect them, they share their secrets." Marcus leaned against the central island, his expensive suit jacket discarded, his sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that had once known manual labor before wealth and worry had softened his hands. Something about Dorothy's presence was awakening memories of his grandfather, who had started the Ashwood restaurant empire with a single diner in San Francisco's Mission District. The old man had possessed the same quiet authority, the same ability to find elegance in simplicity. "My grandfather used to say something similar," Marcus murmured, almost to himself. "He said cooking was like prayer. You had to mean it, or it was just going through the motions." Dorothy paused in her cutting, her eyes finding Marcus's across the kitchen island. "Your grandfather sounds like a wise man. What happened to his restaurant?" A shadow crossed Marcus's features. "I turned it into an empire. 5 restaurants, 2 hotels, catering contracts worth millions. He died thinking I had lost sight of what mattered." His voice carried the weight of years of regret. Maybe he was right. The kitchen fell into contemplative silence, broken only by the gentle sizzling of Dorothy's onions as she introduced them to a pan with a small amount of butter. The aroma that rose was somehow different from what any of them had achieved. Richer, more complex, as if the simple act of properly caramelizing onions had unlocked hidden depths of flavor. Tyler found himself drawn to the stove, his earlier mockery replaced by genuine curiosity. "What's different about the way you're doing this?" "It's just onions and butter. The difference is attention," Dorothy explained, stirring the onions with her wooden spoon in slow, contemplative circles. "Most people cook with their eyes on the clock. I cook with my eyes on the food. These onions will tell me when they're ready, not the timer." As if to prove her point, she adjusted the heat slightly, a minute change that somehow transformed the entire cooking process. The onions began to release their sugars more evenly, their color shifting from white to pale gold to rich amber without a single piece burning or browning too quickly. Sarah moved closer, her professional training warring with what she was witnessing. "But how do you know when to adjust the heat?" "There's no technique for that. It's not something they teach in culinary school." "Because culinary school teaches you to cook with your head," Dorothy said gently. "But real cooking happens with your heart, your nose, your intuition, all those senses working together in harmony." She demonstrated by lifting the pan slightly, listening to the subtle change in the sizzling sound, then adjusting the flame again. "Hear that? The sound just changed. The onions are telling me they're ready for the next stage." The lesson continued as Dorothy began preparing the soup course. a simple butternut squash bisque that looked deceptively basic on the menu, but required perfect balance to achieve its intended effect. She selected the squash with the same careful attention she had given the onions, her fingers testing the skin for the right combination of firmness and give. Marcus found himself asking questions he hadn't thought about in years. How do you know which squash to choose? The same way you know which person to trust, Dorothy replied, cradling the golden gourd in her hands. Weight, texture, the way it responds to pressure. This one has lived the right amount of time, absorbed the right amount of sunshine. It's ready to share what it's learned. The poetry in her words struck something deep in Marcus's chest. He remembered his grandfather speaking about ingredients the same way, as if they were collaborators rather than mere components. When had he stopped thinking about food that way? When had it become just business, just profit margins and critic reviews? As Dorothy began roasting the squash, the kitchen filled with an aroma that seemed to carry memories of autumn afternoons and childhood comfort. Tyler, who had been preparing vegetables with aggressive efficiency, found his pace slowing to match the rhythm Dorothy had established. Without realizing it, he began to pay attention to the subtle changes in color and texture that indicated when his prep work was truly complete. Mrs. Weatherby, Sarah said hesitantly, where exactly did you and your husband run restaurants? Another shadow passed across Dorothy's features, deeper this time. She continued her work silently for a long moment, turning the roasted squash with gentle precision. We had a place in Vermont for almost 20 years. Small town, nothing fancy, just good food made with attention and love. What was it called? Tyler asked, his earlier antagonism replaced by genuine interest. The Weatherby Inn. Dorothy's voice grew soft. My husband, James, was the head chef. I ran the front of house and helped in the kitchen. We served farm to table before it became fashionable, worked with local farmers, changed our menu with the seasons. People came from 3 states away for Sunday dinner. Marcus felt a shift in his understanding of the woman working alongside his staff. That sounds like it was a successful operation. Why did you leave? Dorothy's hands never stopped moving, but Marcus could see the effort it took to keep them steady. James got sick. Cancer. We had to sell everything to pay for treatments that didn't work anyway. After the funeral, I couldn't bear to stay in a place where every corner held memories we'd never make again. The kitchen fell silent except for the gentle sounds of cooking, the whisper of onions caramelizing, the soft bubbling of the squash as it roasted, the rhythmic chopping that had taken on Dorothy's unhurried cadence. Each person absorbed her words in their own way, understanding suddenly why she had accepted work as a cleaning woman, why she moved through the world with such quiet humility. I'm sorry, Marcus said finally, the inadequacy of the words hanging in the air. Dorothy nodded her acceptance of his sympathy, then lifted her eyes to meet his. Loss teaches you what really matters. It strips away everything superficial and leaves you with the essential truth. That's why I know how to cook, Mr. Ashwood. Not because I learned techniques or memorized recipes, but because I learned to pour my heart into every dish, to honor the ingredients and the people who would eat them. She moved to the stove where her soup was beginning to take shape, adding a touch of cream with the same deliberate grace she brought to every action. Food is never just about flavor. It's about connection, about nurturing, about creating moments of joy in the midst of ordinary days. When you forget that, you lose the soul of cooking. Tyler stared at his prep station, where perfectly diced vegetables suddenly seemed to mock his earlier pride in technical precision. How do you come back from that? How do you learn to cook with heart when you've been doing it mechanically for so long? Dorothy smiled, the expression transforming her weathered features into something almost luminous, the same way you learn anything important, one dish at a time, one meal at a time. You start by paying attention to what you're doing and why you're doing it. You remember that every person who tastes your food is someone's beloved child, parent, friend. You cook for them the way you would want someone to cook for your own family. Sarah found herself thinking about her own motivation for entering culinary school, the joy she had felt the first time she successfully prepared a meal that brought tears of happiness to her grandmother's eyes. When had that joy been replaced by the anxiety of perfection, the fear of failure? As if reading her thoughts, Dorothy continued, "The critic who's coming tonight, he's not your enemy. He's just someone who's forgotten how to taste with wonder instead of judgment. Our job isn't to impress him with complexity. Our job is to remind him why he fell in love with food in the first place." Marcus stared at the simple soup simmering on the stove, its aroma filling the kitchen with promise. For the first time in months, maybe years, he felt something other than anxiety about a meal service. He felt anticipation, curiosity about what might emerge from this collaboration with a woman who had appeared like an answer to a prayer he hadn't known he was praying. "What do we do next?" he asked, and for the first time in years, the question carried hope instead of desperation. The kitchen had transformed into something resembling an orchestra during warm-up. Each cook finding their rhythm within the larger symphony Dorothy was conducting through quiet suggestion rather than direct command. The frantic energy that had defined the evening's beginning had mellowed into purposeful intensity, each person working with heightened awareness of their role in the larger composition. Dorothy moved between stations like a master conductor, her weathered hands occasionally correcting a technique here, adjusting a seasoning there, but mostly observing with the patience of someone who understood that great cooking emerged from confidence rather than control. The transformation in the young cooks was remarkable. Tyler's knife work had become more thoughtful, Sarah's sauce work more intuitive, and even Marcus had shed his executive distance to become an active participant in the preparation. At the fish station, Dorothy examined the day-boat scallops that would comprise the third course, her experienced fingers reading their texture and freshness with the precision of a master jeweler evaluating precious stones. These were beautiful specimens, ivory white, with a subtle translucency that promised sweetness, their surface dry enough to achieve perfect caramelization. "The key with scallops," she explained to Tyler, who had appointed himself her unofficial apprentice, is to treat them like a first date. Be respectful, don't rush, and let their natural beauty shine through. Tyler laughed despite himself, the first genuine moment of levity the kitchen had experienced all evening. "Did you just compare cooking scallops to dating?" "Everything about cooking is about relationships," Dorothy replied with a smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "The relationship between heat and protein, between acid and fat, between the cook and the ingredient. The scallop wants to be perfect for you, but only if you give it the right environment to succeed." She demonstrated by heating a stainless steel pan to the precise temperature where a drop of water would dance across the surface for exactly 3 seconds before evaporating. Her movements were economical, each gesture purposeful. When she placed the first scallop in the pan, the sear was immediate and perfect, a golden crust forming while the interior remained tender and translucent. Sarah paused in her own prep work to watch, mesmerized by the simplicity of it. "How do you know the exact temperature without a thermometer?" "Practice," Dorothy said simply. "But more than that, attention. Most people heat their pans too hot because they're impatient, or not hot enough because they're afraid. The pan tells you when it's ready, if you listen to it." Marcus watched from across the kitchen, his businessman's mind struggling to quantify what he was witnessing. Dorothy's techniques weren't revolutionary. Any competent cook knew how to sear scallops, but there was something in her approach that elevated the mundane into artistry. Each scallop emerged from the pan as a perfect golden disc, The caramelization even and beautiful. The texture precise. Mrs. Weatherby, Marcus said, approaching her station, I have to ask, with skills like yours, why aren't you running your own kitchen somewhere? The question hung in the air as Dorothy carefully plated the scallops, her weathered hands steady as she spooned a delicate cauliflower puree alongside each one. For a moment, the weight of unspoken history settled over her features like a veil. After James died, she said quietly, I tried to keep cooking professionally, applied to several restaurants, even tried to start over in a new city. But everywhere I went, all they saw was an old woman past her prime. They wanted young energy, current trends, Instagram-worthy presentation. She gestured toward her simple plating style. Elegant, but unfashionable. Nobody wanted to hear about 40 years of experience if it came wrapped in gray hair and wrinkled hands. The injustice of it struck Tyler like a physical blow. He thought about his own hiring at the Ashwood estate, how his youth and culinary school credentials had opened doors that would have remained closed to someone like Dorothy. That's insane. After what I've seen tonight, any restaurant would be lucky to have you. The food industry is young and beautiful, Dorothy replied with remarkable absence of bitterness. I understand that, but understanding doesn't make rejection hurt less. After a while, you start to believe maybe they're right. Maybe your time has passed. Sarah felt tears threatening at the corners of her eyes, thinking about her own grandmother who had taught her to cook, but whose traditional techniques were dismissed as old-fashioned in culinary school. So you took cleaning jobs? Dorothy nodded, turning her attention to the meat course where the Wagyu beef waited for final preparation. Honest work is honest work. I may have been invisible to the culinary world, but I could still contribute something valuable. And cleaning gave me access to professional kitchens, even if I wasn't allowed to cook in them. The revelation reframed everything about Dorothy's presence in the kitchen. She hadn't stumbled into this opportunity. She had been studying, learning, preparing for a moment like this without even realizing it. Every night spent cleaning the Ashwood kitchen had been an education, observing techniques and equipment, understanding the flow and rhythm of professional service. Marcus felt something crack open in his chest, a recognition of his own complicity in a system that valued appearances over substance. How many talented people had he overlooked because they didn't fit his image of what a chef should look like? How many Dorothy Weatherbys were cleaning offices and restaurants, their gifts invisible to employers focused on youth and trendiness? What would you cook? Marcus asked suddenly. If you could design a menu without any restrictions, if you had complete creative freedom. Dorothy's eyes lit up with a fire that had been banked but never extinguished. Food that tells stories, dishes that connect people to memories, to seasons, to the land that produced their ingredients. Nothing flashy or complicated, just honest flavors prepared with respect and love. She began to describe meals that sounded like poetry: roasted chicken with herbs from a kitchen garden, soups that changed with the availability of local vegetables, desserts that celebrated the natural sweetness of perfectly ripe fruit. As she spoke, her hands moved unconsciously, shaping flavors in the air, her entire being animated by the vision of food as something more than mere sustenance. Tyler found himself captivated by her passion, recognizing something he had lost in his rush to prove himself professionally. That sounds amazing. Why don't you open another restaurant? Dorothy's expression grew wistful. At my age, with no capital, no connections, no credibility in the current food scene, the dream is beautiful, but the reality is impossible. What if it wasn't impossible? Marcus heard himself saying. The words emerging before his conscious mind had fully formed the thought. What if someone believed in your vision enough to back it? The kitchen fell silent except for the gentle sounds of simmering sauces and the soft hiss of vegetables in olive oil. Dorothy stared at Marcus, searching his face for signs of polite fantasy or genuine possibility. "Mr. Ashwood, I appreciate the thought, but I'm serious," Marcus interrupted, his voice carrying growing conviction. "I've been looking for something real, something with soul, to add to the Ashwood portfolio. What if we partnered on a restaurant that embodied everything you just described?" Dorothy's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her wooden spoon, emotion threatening to overwhelm her carefully maintained composure. "You don't even know if I can succeed with tonight's dinner. You don't know if the critic will appreciate what we're creating." "I don't care what the critic thinks," Marcus realized as he spoke the words that he meant them completely. "What I care about is that for the first time in years, this kitchen feels alive. People are cooking with passion instead of fear. That's worth more than any review." Sarah and Tyler exchanged glances, recognizing that they were witnessing something unprecedented in their experience with Marcus Ashwood. The businessman who had terrorized them with his anxiety about critics and reputation was proposing a partnership based purely on artistic integrity and human connection. Dorothy stared at the beautiful Wagyu beef, her mind racing through possibilities she had forced herself to abandon years ago. Could it be possible? Could the dream she had buried with her husband be resurrected in partnership with this unlikely ally? "We should focus on tonight first," she said finally, but her voice carried a note of hope that hadn't been there before. "Let's see if we can create something beautiful together. Then we can talk about the future." Marcus nodded, understanding that trust would be built one meal at a time, one perfect dish at a time. But as he watched Dorothy begin the final preparation of the beef, seasoning it with her homemade spice blend and handling it with the reverence of a master craftsman, he felt certain that the future was already taking shape in the steam and heat of this transformed kitchen. The real test was yet to come. The dining room of the Ashwood estate had been transformed into a stage where careers were made or destroyed with each bite, each considered swallow. Jonathan Pierce sat alone at the mahogany table that could accommodate 12 daughters, his presence filling the space with an energy that seemed to draw all light toward his critical gaze. At 62, he had the lean build of someone who ate professionally but never indulgently, his silver hair perfectly styled, his charcoal suit impeccably tailored. His hands, pale and well-manicured, moved with the precision of a surgeon as he arranged his notebook and pen beside the heavy silver flatware. Pierce had built his reputation by destroying pretension and elevating authenticity, though the distinction between the two had blurred over the decades of his influential career. His reviews in California Cuisine magazine could launch unknown restaurants to national fame or reduce established institutions to bankruptcy within months. Tonight's visit to the Ashwood estate was particularly significant. Rumors of the family's financial difficulties had reached even his exclusive circles, and his review could determine whether the Ashwood name survived another generation. In the kitchen, Dorothy stood at the pass, her weathered hands steady as she made final adjustments to the first course. The soup course had emerged exactly as she had envisioned, a butternut squash bisque that glowed like liquid amber in the warming bowls, its surface decorated with a simple swirl of cream and a sprinkle of toasted pumpkin seed. The aroma was intoxicating, carrying hints of autumn harvests and cozy fireplaces, but beneath the comfort lay sophisticated technique and perfect balance. Marcus hovered nearby, his earlier confidence wavering as the reality of judgment approached. "Are you certain about this presentation? Pierce is used to more elaborate plating, molecular techniques, avant-garde presentations." "Mr. Ashwood," Dorothy said gently, her eyes never leaving the soup as she performed one final quality check. "We agreed to cook with heart, not ego. This soup is perfect because it's honest. It tastes like what it is. Beautiful ingredients treated with respect and skill. If Mr. Pierce can't appreciate that, then perhaps he's forgotten why he became a food critic in the first place. Tyler carefully lifted the bowl, his movements precise, despite the nervous energy that coursed through his young frame. As the kitchen's newest member, he had volunteered for the honor and terror of serving the critic personally, understanding that his presentation would be scrutinized as closely as the food itself. The walk from kitchen to dining room felt endless, each step echoing against the marble floors with what seemed like thunderous volume. Tyler placed the soup before Jonathan Pierce with practiced grace, then stepped back to await the reaction that would determine so much more than his own future. Pierce lifted the spoon with deliberate slowness, his movements calculated to maximize the psychological pressure on everyone watching from the kitchen doorway. The first taste was taken with scientific precision, the soup held on his palate for examination before being swallowed with careful consideration. His expression remained neutral, giving nothing away. His pen poised over his notebook, but motionless. Seconds stretched into eternity. Pierce took a second taste, then a third, his neutral mask beginning to crack almost imperceptibly. Something shifted in his posture, a relaxation that hadn't been present when he first sat down. He set down his spoon and wrote a brief note, his handwriting as precise as his tasting technique. In the kitchen, the staff held their collective breath. Dorothy continued her preparation of the second course, but Marcus could see the tension in the set of her shoulders, the way her movements had become slightly more careful, more deliberate. The weight of judgment was affecting everyone, even someone with her experience and philosophical approach to cooking. "Whatever happens," Sarah whispered, "this is the best soup I've ever tasted. If he doesn't appreciate it, that's his loss." Dorothy smiled at the young woman's loyalty, but her attention remained focused on the scallops that would comprise the next course. Each one had been seared to perfection, the caramelization creating a golden crust that would give way to tender sweetness. The accompanying cauliflower puree was silky and subtle, designed to complement rather than compete with the scallops. Natural flavor. A few microgreens and a drizzle of brown butter completed the composition. Simple, elegant, and flawlessly executed. Tyler returned to the kitchen with Pierce's empty soup bowl, his eyes wide with barely contained excitement. He finished every drop. He whispered urgently, "I've never seen him clean a bowl like that." And he wrote something in his notebook. I couldn't see what, but it was more than a few words. The news sent a surge of cautious optimism through the kitchen staff, but Dorothy remained focused on the task at hand. She plated the scallops with the same meticulous care she had shown throughout the evening, each element positioned precisely to create visual harmony without sacrificing the integrity of the dish. "Remember," she told Tyler as he prepared to serve the second course, "presentation is part of the experience. But it's not a performance. You're sharing something beautiful that we created together. Be proud of that." Tyler carried the scallops to the dining room with renewed confidence, his earlier nervousness replaced by genuine enthusiasm for what they had accomplished. Pierce received the dish with the same neutral expression, but Tyler thought he detected a flicker of curiosity in the critic's eyes as he examined the simple yet elegant presentation. The first bite was taken with the same deliberate precision as the soup course, but Pierce's reaction was more immediate this time. His eyebrows lifted almost imperceptibly, and he took a second bite more quickly than his usual methodical pace would suggest. The scallops were perfect, sweet, tender, with the caramelized exterior providing textural contrast without overwhelming the delicate seafood. The cauliflower puree added richness without heaviness, and the brown butter provided a nutty complexity that elevated the entire composition. Pierce finished the dish completely, something Tyler had never witnessed in the 3 previous times he had served the demanding critic. More notes were added to the notebook, longer entries that suggested genuine engagement rather than mere professional obligation. Back in the kitchen, Dorothy was putting the finishing touches on the main course, Outretheater Tantry Faders. The Wagyu beef that represented the evening's centerpiece, the meat had been cooked to perfect medium rare, its interior warm and red, the exterior seared to create a crust that sealed in the juices. She sliced it with reverent precision, arranging the medallions on plates that had been warmed to the ideal temperature. The accompanying vegetables, simple roasted carrots and fingerling potatoes, had been chosen to complement rather than distract from the beef's perfection. A red wine reduction, made with the same attention to detail as every other element, provided richness without masking the meat's natural flavor. Marcus watched the plating process with something approaching awe. He had eaten in the world's finest restaurants, had tasted the creations of celebrity chefs and Michelin-starred artists, but there was something about Dorothy's approach that transcended mere technique. Every movement was purposeful, tatuo. Every decision made with consideration for the complete dining experience rather than individual effect. "This is what I've been searching for," he said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else. "This is what my grandfather would have recognized as real cooking." Dorothy looked up from her plating, her weathered face luminous with the satisfaction of work well done. This is what cooking becomes when you stop trying to impress and start trying to nourish. When you remember that the person eating your food is someone deserving of your best effort, not your ego. Tyler carried the main course to Pierce with ceremony, understanding that this dish would likely determine the final judgment on their collaborative effort. The critic examined the presentation with his usual scrutiny, noting the simplicity of the plating, the quality of the ingredients, the perfection of the cooking temperature. The first bite was followed immediately by a second, then a third. Pierce's professional composure began to crack as he encountered flavors that spoke to something deeper than mere technical proficiency. The beef was extraordinary, tender, flavorful, cooked with the kind of intuitive precision that comes only from decades of experience. But more than that, it carried the unmistakable signature of someone who cooked with love, rather than ambition. For the first time in years, Jonathan Pierce found himself transported by a meal, reminded of why he had fallen in love with food criticism in the first place. This wasn't molecular gastronomy, or fusion confusion, or any of the trends that had dominated his recent reviews. This was honest cooking elevated to artistry, through skill, attention, and something indefinable that could only be called soul. He finished every bite, wrote extensive notes, and sat back in his chair with an expression of genuine satisfaction that had been absent from his face for far too long. In the kitchen, the staff waited for Tyler's return with barely contained anticipation, knowing that the verdict would determine not just their immediate futures, but the direction of their professional lives. Dorothy continued her work on the dessert course, her hands steady despite the magnitude of the moment. Trusting in the power of authentic cooking to speak for itself. The judgment was coming, but somehow, it no longer felt like the most important thing in the room. Jonathan Pierce sat in contemplative silence, his notebook filled with observations that challenged every assumption he had brought to the Ashwood estate. The meal had defied expectations, not through innovation, but through fundamental rightness he hadn't encountered in years of professional dining. Each dish spoke with the voice of someone who understood ingredients at a cellular level. The dessert arrived as Tyler approached with unusual confidence, a perfectly poached pear in white wine and vanilla, accompanied by honeyed mascarpone and a delicate tuile cookie. The presentation was beautiful without being precious, flavors clean and harmonious. Pierce lifted the spoon with anticipation rather than obligation, a transformation that would have shocked colleagues who knew him only as the ruthless critic. The pear was transcendent, soft without being mushy, infused with spice, but retaining its essential character. As he savored the final course, Pierce found himself remembering why he had fallen in love with food criticism. Tonight's meal reminded him of the fundamental human act of nourishment elevated to artistry through skill, attention, and love. In the kitchen, a Santi 2020, Dorothy cleaned her station methodically while Marcus paced nearby, confidence wavering as Pierce's verdict approached. "Do you think he appreciated what we did?" Sarah asked quietly. Dorothy paused her cleaning. "I think we gave him something honest. Whether he has the palate to appreciate honesty over spectacle remains to be seen." Tyler burst through doors with excitement. He wants to speak with the chef. He's never done that before. Never asked to meet anyone from the kitchen. The request presented an unexpected dilemma. Who was the chef of record? Marcus owned the restaurant. Sarah was sous chef. But Dorothy had guided every dish. The collaboration didn't translate easily into hierarchical expectations. Marcus stepped forward. "I'll speak with him. This is my restaurant." Dorothy's weathered hand touched his arm gently. "Mr. Ashwood, with respect, Mr. Pierce asked for the chef. He deserves to know who actually prepared his meal." Marcus faced a test of whether newfound appreciation for authentic cooking could overcome business instincts. "You're right. You should speak with him. You earned that conversation." Dorothy smoothed her simple dress, removing her apron to reveal humble clothing that contrasted sharply with the sophisticated meal she had created. The dining room seemed vast as she entered. Footsteps muffled by thick Persian rugs. Pierce looked up as she approached, critical eyes taking in every detail. "Mr. Pierce, I understand you wanted to speak with the chef." Pierce studied her, noting the gap between humble appearance and sophisticated meal. "I have to admit, you're not what I expected. The meal I just experienced was extraordinary, not because of techniques or innovation, but because of something I rarely encounter: soul." "Where did you train?" Pierce asked, pen poised. "In my father's restaurant, starting at 16. Then in my own kitchen for 37 years of marriage to a chef who taught me that cooking is conversation between cook and ingredients." "And your most recent position?" Dorothy felt the weight of potential judgment. "I've been working as a cleaning woman. After my husband died and we lost our restaurant to medical bills, I found that employers prioritized youth over experience. The admission hung between them. Pierce could interpret this as inspiring or damaging, depending on his perspective. Instead of dismissal, Pierce showed respect. "Mrs. Weatherby, I've been reviewing restaurants for 23 years. I've eaten at Michelin-starred establishments, tasted celebrity chefs, creation. Tonight's meal was better than 90% of what I've experienced in those elite places." Dorothy felt tears threatening as Pierce continued. "What you created reminded me why I became a food critic, to celebrate authentic artistry. This wasn't about impressing me with technique. This was about nourishing me, creating an experience that honored both ingredients and the person eating them." Pierce stood, lending formality to his words. "I will be writing about this meal. But more than that, I want to know if you have plans to return to professional cooking. The industry needs voices like yours." Dorothy glanced toward the kitchen where others waited anxiously. "Mr. Pierce, I believe the future might hold interesting opportunities, but tonight was about proving that good food comes from good intentions, and sometimes unlikely collaborations produce beautiful results." Pierce smiled genuinely. "Mrs. Weatherby, I have a feeling tonight was just the beginning." As Dorothy walked back toward the kitchen, she carried not just Pierce's approval, but knowledge that authenticity had triumphed over pretension, that skill recognized no boundaries of age or appearance, and that sometimes the most profound transformations begin with the simple act of being given a chance to show who you really are. The future, impossible just hours earlier, was suddenly bright with promise. 3 months after the evening that changed everything, Dorothy Weatherby stood in the transformed space that would become the Weatherby kitchen. watching contractors put finishing touches on the open kitchen design that would allow diners to witness the magic she created with simple ingredients and decades of accumulated wisdom. The restaurant space, formerly a failed fusion establishment in downtown Napa, Arfinhernto, Saradapoits, had been reborn under Marcus Ashwood's partnership with a warmth that felt like stepping into someone's beloved family home. The design reflected Dorothy's philosophy of honest hospitality, reclaimed wood tables that invited conversation, soft lighting that flattered every age, and an atmosphere that celebrated comfort without sacrificing sophistication. The centerpiece was the open kitchen, where Dorothy's weathered hands would be visible as she transformed seasonal ingredients into dishes that nourished both body and soul. Every detail had been chosen to reflect authenticity over trendiness, substance over spectacle. Marcus moved through the space with an energy Dorothy hadn't seen during their first meeting. His expensive suits replaced by casual elegance that suggested a man who had rediscovered joy in his work. The transformation in him had been as remarkable as the restaurant's renovation. The anxious businessman worried about critics and profit margins had evolved into someone who understood that genuine success came from creating spaces where people felt valued and nourished. "The final health inspection is tomorrow," Marcus reported, consulting his tablet with satisfaction rather than his former anxiety. "Jonathan Pierce's review hits the magazine stands next week. And we already have reservations booked 3 months out. I've never seen response like this." Dorothy smiled as she tested the seasoning in a pot of the butternut squash soup that would anchor the restaurant's opening menu. The recipe was the same one that had first demonstrated her abilities to the skeptical kitchen staff at the Ashwood estate, but now it carried additional significance as the dish that had launched a partnership built on mutual respect and shared values. "Cheat. Success isn't about the reservations," Dorothy reminded him gently. "It's about whether we honor each one by giving our best effort to every single plate we send out." The kitchen staff Dorothy had assembled reflected her commitment to opportunity over pedigree. Sarah Chen had left her position at the Ashwood estate to become the sous chef, drawn by the chance to cook with soul rather than just technique. Tyler Morrison had eagerly accepted the position of garde-manger, his youthful energy tempered by hard-won respect for experience and tradition. The team was small but unified by a shared understanding that they were part of something larger than individual career advancement. The changes extended beyond personnel. Dorothy had insisted on relationships with local farmers who shared her commitment to seasonal ingredients and sustainable practices. The menu would change with the harvests, Nawan Poing Phi, Kitipao, reflecting the natural rhythm of California's agricultural seasons rather than the artificial demands of year-round availability. Each dish would tell the story of its origins, the farm that grew the vegetables, the dairy that provided the cheese, the ranch that raised the livestock. "I still can't believe this is happening," Sarah confided as she prepped vegetables for the evening's final training service before opening. 6 months ago, I was struggling to make a beurre blanc without breaking it. Now I'm helping to open a restaurant that could change how people think about American comfort food." Dorothy paused in her stirring to look at the young woman who had become like a daughter to her. "Sarah, you always had the skill. What you needed was permission to trust your instincts instead of constantly second-guessing yourself. That's what I hope we can offer all our staff. The confidence to cook with their hearts as well as their hands." The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor as Jonathan Pierce entered the restaurant during the staff's final rehearsal dinner. His presence created a momentary ripple of tension among the younger staff members, but Dorothy greeted him with the same calm grace she brought to every aspect of her work. "Mr. Pierce," she said warmly, "I hope you're not here to review us before we officially open. We're still finding our rhythm." Pierce smiled, the expression carrying genuine warmth that had replaced his former critical distance. Actually, I'm here as a friend and admirer. I wanted to see how you were settling into your new role as chef and owner. The conversation that followed revealed the broader impact of that transformative evening at the Ashwood estate. Pierce's review, published under the headline, "The Hidden Grace, When Authenticity Triumphs Over Pretension," had become one of the most widely shared restaurant reviews in the magazine's history. But more importantly, it had sparked a broader conversation about ageism in the culinary industry and the value of experience over trend chasing. The response has been extraordinary, Pierce explained, as Dorothy walked him through the dining room. I've received letters from retired chefs, home cooks, restaurant workers who felt invisible in their own kitchens. Your story has reminded people that great cooking isn't about Instagram followers or celebrity status. It's about the fundamental human act of nourishing others. Dorothy felt the weight of unexpected responsibility settling on her shoulders. She had simply wanted the opportunity to cook professionally again, to share the gift that had been shaped by decades of experience and loss. She hadn't anticipated becoming a symbol of second chances or the voice for overlooked talent in an industry obsessed with youth and novelty. I hope I can live up to people's expectations, she said quietly. Don't cook for expectations, Pierce advised, unconsciously echoing the wisdom she had shared with her own staff. Cook for the person sitting at the table who needs to be reminded that someone cares enough to prepare their meal with attention and love. That's what you did for me that night. And that's why this restaurant will succeed. As opening night approached, Dorothy found herself thinking about James, her late husband, whose memory had been both anchor and sail throughout her journey back to professional cooking. She could feel his presence in the kitchen they had designed together, in the menu that honored their shared philosophy of honest hospitality, in every decision that prioritized nourishment over profit. The final staff meeting before opening took place in the dining room, surrounded by tables set for the next evening's first service. Dorothy looked at the faces around her. Marcus, whose business acumen had been tempered by rediscovered passion. Sarah, whose technical skills had been elevated by newfound confidence. Tyler, whose youthful energy had been refined by respect for tradition. And the other team members who had chosen to be part of something bigger than individual success. Tomorrow night, we welcome our first guests, Dorothy began, her voice carrying the weight of everything they had accomplished together. Some will come because of reviews they've read, others because they're curious about the story behind this place. But regardless of why they walk through that door, our job is the same, to make them feel valued, nourished, and reminded that food prepared with love can transform an ordinary evening into something memorable. She paused, looking around the room that represented the impossible dream made real through collaboration, second chances, and the willingness to see potential where others saw only limitation. We're not just serving dinner tomorrow night. We're proving that authenticity still has value. That experience deserves respect. That the most beautiful transformations often begin with the simple act of giving someone a chance to show who they really are. The applause that followed wasn't just recognition of her words, but acknowledgement of the journey they had all taken together, from the anxiety-filled kitchen of the Ashwood estate to this moment of anticipation and possibility. Tomorrow would bring the critics, the customers, the ultimate test of whether their collaboration could succeed in the broader world. But tonight, they were ready. 1 year after opening, the Weatherby Kitchen had become a beacon of authentic hospitality in Napa Valley. The James Beard Foundation had nominated Dorothy for Outstanding Chef, making her the oldest nominee in the award's history. But her truest measure of success was visible each evening in the faces around her dining room, families celebrating, couples reconnecting, solo diners welcomed as valued guests. The morning sun streamed through windows as Dorothy prepared for the anniversary dinner. Tonight's menu featured the dishes that had launched her comeback, now prepared with the confidence of proven success. Marcus arrived with coffee, his transformation from anxious businessman to passionate partner complete. "We're booked 6 months out," he reported with satisfaction rather than stress. But the real success is that we haven't lost what makes this place special." Dorothy smiled, testing her signature butternut squash soup, the dish that had first demonstrated her abilities to skeptical staff. "The moment we start cooking for accolades instead of people we lose our soul." Sarah had blossomed into a remarkable sous chef, her technical skills now matched by intuitive understanding. Tyler had grown from arrogant line cook to confident chef de partie, his work reflecting Dorothy's teaching that every cut should be made with intention. The afternoon brought James Ashwood, Marcus's son, carrying culinary school acceptance letters. The young man had abandoned law school plans after witnessing Dorothy's approach to cooking. "I got into all 3 programs," James announced. "Do you think I'm making the right choice?" Dorothy paused her prep work. "Culinary school teaches techniques, but not heart. The question is whether you understand that cooking is about serving others, creating moments of joy in people's lives." She gestured toward early diners being seated. "Those people trust us to care about their experience. That's the real responsibility of being a chef." "I want to learn that kind of cooking," James said earnestly. "Then you're making the right choice. Remember, the most important lessons come from listening to your ingredients and never forgetting that every plate carries potential to brighten someone's day." Evening service began with familiar rhythm, purposeful without being frantic, efficient without sacrificing attention. Each dish was prepared as if it were the most important plate leaving the kitchen. As the anniversary dinner reached its crescendo, Dorothy reflected on her journey. The loss of her husband and restaurant had seemed like an ending, forcing her into invisibility. But that apparent ending had been preparation for a beginning she couldn't have imagined. A second act proving the value of experience and authentic cooking. The final course was her white wine poached pear, the dessert that had sealed Jonathan Pierce's appreciation. As Tyler plated each serving, Dorothy felt James's presence, his memory infusing every decision she made. The evening concluded with staff gathered around the kitchen's central island, sharing stories from the past year. Dorothy looked at the faces surrounding her, young cooks who valued tradition alongside innovation, experienced servers who had rediscovered joy in hospitality, partners who had proven that authentic success was more satisfying than hollow achievement. "1 year ago, I was cleaning this space after other people's parties," Dorothy said warmly. "Tonight, I'm celebrating with people who've become family, in a restaurant that proves authentic cooking still creates connection and joy." She raised her champagne glass, hands steady with confidence earned through surviving loss, overcoming prejudice, and finding her way back to meaningful work, to second chances, to seeing potential where others see problems, and to understanding that love is the most important ingredient in any dish. The toast celebrated more than restaurant success. It acknowledged transformation, proof that authenticity could triumph over pretension, and the eternal truth that good food prepared with love had power to change lives beyond a single meal. As celebration continued, Dorothy felt James's approval warming her heart like sunshine after winter. They had built something beautiful together, honoring tradition while embracing future possibilities. The Weatherby kitchen would continue serving meals that nourished body and soul. Dorothy would keep teaching that technique without heart was mere mechanics, and the legacy of second chances would inspire others to recognize extraordinary potential in unlikely places. The journey from invisibility to recognition, from loss to renewal, from cleaning floors to creating joy, it was complete, but also just beginning. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of the transformative power of believing in people when others can't see their potential, please share it with someone who needs to hear that their second act might be even more beautiful than their first. Like this story, if you believe authenticity and experience deserve recognition, and comment with your own story of someone who saw your hidden talents when the world overlooked them. Subscribe to discover more stories celebrating extraordinary potential hidden in ordinary moments. Every person has depths waiting to be recognized, and every ending contains seeds of magnificent new beginnings.